بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين، واللعن الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. Sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I began a few nights ago the program with a hadith from Imam Hussein salawatullah salamu alayhi, clearly describing the crisis that the early ummah was facing. الناس عبيد الدنيا والدين لعق على ألسنتهم. People are slaves of the material life. They pay lip service to the faith so long as there is a benefit from it. Once they are tested and tried and they face calamities in their life, very few people remain truly faithful. I began by trying to pose a question and ask a question that it begs everyone to find out what happened to the early heritage. What happened to the early community of Islam that 50 years after the demise of the Holy Prophet got so corrupt that under the banner of Islam the grandson of the Holy Prophet is slaughtered with the male companions in the most barbaric way. The slaughtering and the martyrdom is not, for the time being, the issue that I want to focus upon. It's the banner of Islam that makes it critical and tragic. Trying to understand or find an answer, I discussed the number of values that are inherent within the slogans that the Holy Imam had as he traveled from Medina to Mecca and from Mecca to Karbala, and pointed out that there were a number of what we call universal messages from them that we can ascertain and then use those values to reflect on our own life, to see how close we are, despite the appearance of being close to Ahlul Bayt. How really close we are to the values that Ahlul Bayt stood for. Justice was one issue, defense of underdog or people who are marginalized is another, standing up to tyranny, etc., etc. The list of them that I outlined. Upholding these values became critical. And I also, second night, pointed out that the failure to benefit from the message that the Imams have outlined have due to two reasons. Either our understanding of the Shia precepts and the principles of Shiism is not correct, or we understand what we stand for, we are not prepared to practice it because of the comfort zone, the material lifestyle that we have created. It creates its own shackle and paralysis that we are not prepared to come out of that. Why should I risk my material life for certain values that will become harmful? And I pointed out that as time goes on and the circumstances change, it becomes more and more critical to reflect back to the uprising and try to reinterpret, come out with new interpretation. Last night I brought in a different element within the conversation to look at this concept of what we call intidar, or awaiting for the return of the Holy Imam. And once we unpack that, we find out that the two views, particularly the most dynamic interpretation of the awakening, implore upon us, and it becomes an obligation, that we really have a role and a responsibility to play within the community that we live in. The community desperately needs guidance, and a society that purely focuses on the material life will not be able to guide its own society to the correct path, because by definition they have already excluded spirituality out of the equation. And it is our responsibility, since we believe in it, to come back and deliver the message. Combining the fact that we have a dynamic awaiting for the return of the Imam, that during this period we have a responsibility. Number two, the inherent values within the uprising of Ashura itself makes it an obligation that we combine these two together and come up with a new definition. Living in the US makes this even more critical. Those of you who were present this morning at Imam Ali Center, I briefly alluded to this. I want to use the metaphor of three concentric circles to explain my point of view. We live in a small community, call it the Shia community. And then that is the inner circle. Then we have a little bit larger circle, which is the other Muslim community that live around us. They have some common denominators, but they disagree with a number of principles. And there is a third, the bigger, the wider circle, which is the outer community. Fundamentally, we have to start from the inner circle. But we should not allow the historical interpretation of the inner circle, the narrow interpretation of Ashura uprising, to hold us back from the greater responsibility that we have to the bigger community and the larger community outside. There are those who are happy with the notion of commemorating or commiserating Ashura in the most classic traditional way you can imagine. Come to the mosque, do latmiyah, or in some mosques Zanjir, or even Tatbir, or whatever it is. That makes them happy, and they think that they have discharged their responsibility towards Ashura, and this is how they, let's call it, commiserate and express their pain and sorrow. It's their prerogative. They should be allowed to do it. But other people that they think they have a responsibility towards the community outside must reflect. This methodology, the approach, might work inside the mosque, but it would not work outside. Whether we want to expand these values to the slightly outer circle, which is the Muslim community itself, that they may have something in common with us, but they may not. What certainly is not going to work with the community at large, or the society at large, particularly the more educated one, that the concept of emotion and the role of emotion does not play a major role. You just look at how speakers speak in their midst. Very few fiery speakers you get, unless within African American community or others. But in the ordinary, it's more emphasis on the style of the narrative and the language that you use. And then with this in mind, it becomes very difficult to take the values of Ashura and the uprising of Ashura in the light of our responsibility during awakening and take it to the community at large. They have really no comprehension whatsoever. We have huge number of values in common. We talk in the beginning of the 21st century, we talk about human rights. We can use Ashura to explain the concept of human rights. We talk about justice. There you are. We talk about liberty and freedom of thought. We talk about removal of the shackle of material life to allow oneself to think and be able to analyze what's happening around it freely. That's again a theme that we can take out of Ashura. So the problem is, the way I see it, we may disagree, Ashura has to be removed from the shackle of the traditional interpretation and start all over again. Not because the classic interpretation of Ashura was wrong. Far from it. It might have worked in certain areas, because it's not going to be effective now in this context, time and space that we live in. Sometimes it might become counterproductive. So these three concentric responsibilities or ideas or communities that we have to deal with obligate us to reflect and come out with a new interpretation. Now, how do we challenge, or how do we go about interpreting? Certainly, we have a conservative part of our community that adhere to the classic interpretation, and they are not prepared to budge whatsoever. Any question mark to any part of their action is tantamount to kufr. And we have heard it here, we have heard it in other communities. You try to be critical of the classic interpretation of Ashura and say, well, it's not going to be effective, you become a kafir. So there is a conservative element within our midst that has a unique and narrow approach to the Ashura and its interpretation. Within, that's their prerogative. There are those who become suddenly revolutionary and call for a complete break with the past. I don't think that's going to be effective either. The reformists would prescribe a methodology in which you gradually move from the classic interpretation into a more newer interpretation or nuanced interpretation. That is not going to happen, because the conservative element, call it the active minority, not the silent majority, the active minority, remains adamant that they are not going to budge. So how are we going to do it? As I said, the two elements being put together, fact, number one, the uprising, the slogans within the uprising have clear messages, universal messages to the generations to come. Last night, I pointed out, the night before, I pointed out that if we interpret the call, the last call of the Imam on the day of Ashura, Hal min nasirin yansurna, the call asking, is there anyone to help? Certainly that call was not directed to a unique community around him. There was nobody left. What he was trying to establish, that I stand for justice, I stand for reform, I stand against tyranny, and if ever, whenever, whoever does the same, supports justice against tyranny, and is prepared to give his life or her life for the sake of that ideal, that battle itself becomes the battle of Karbala, and Imam is going to be present. This interpretation is a unique, progressive interpretation that frees Ashura from the traditional, the onion layers that have been piled up over many decades, if not centuries, and focuses on the values inherent within Ashura and its uprising. But contemporary language would call it the liberative element. Christianity had to do with this. The liberation theology had to ultimately come back and say that there are concept values within Christianity that the powerful would not defend, that would not allow these values to be supported. It's the marginalized, the poor, the needy, the destitutes that they need to take the helm in their own hand and reinterpret Christianity so that the liberative element comes out. We need to reflect on Ashura in the same manner. Why? Not, again, I repeat, because some people may not understand me or they have their own unique way of interpreting things. Not because it's classic wrong-right issue. Far from it. It's a classic effectiveness or lack of effectiveness issue, which is not the same of giving judgment, making it a normative issue, right-wrong. What we have is a unique circumstance. We live now in the midst of a community that looks up to us to explain ourselves regarding certain issues that we do. You try to organize, I travel from university to university, you try to organize a symposium on Ashura in the midst of a university environment and try to do Latmiya over there and see how the effect is going to be. For our own youth, not somebody else, not say the Caucasians or somebody who doesn't believe, no, our own youth that live inside the universities, try to organize a banner and a band and with the full paraphernalia, go inside the university and start your Latmiya. Let's not be sentimental, be realistic. There are a number of issues within Ashura that we can use to guide society. There is a verse in the Holy Quran clearly obligates us. In last night's conversation I said that there are two views when it comes to defining our responsibility during the absence of the Imam. There is the quietist view, which I say it is paralyzing and debilitating, and there is a more active view that interprets it, that it believes or it clearly states we as individuals, we have to lay the foundation for the return of the Imam. The concept of Shi'i rapture doesn't make sense. We cannot wait for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to miraculously change things. وَنُرِيدُ أَن نَّمُنَّ عَلَى الَّذِينَ اسْتُضْعِفُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَنَجْعَلَهُمْ أَئِمَّةً وَنَجْعَلَهُمُ الْوَارِثِينَ. Indeed, we intend to favor those who were held as weak and marginalized in the land and to make them leaders and make them inheritors of the earth. This transformation of a society requires work and requires preparation. Nobody else can do it but us. Ashura and the themes of Ashura and the images of Ashura, the messages of Ashura, universal messages, etc., etc., can become a help as long as we are prepared. Tomorrow, inshallah, I will expand it and move it into a different topic, but it is critical for us to really try to understand these universal messages and use proper and eloquent language to explain it to the people. With total respect for those who intend to remain steadfast to the traditional commiseration or expressing their own sorrows, etc., etc. It is a must, an obligation that particularly the youth, that they have the linguistic ability to be taught these values so they can become the spokesperson for the values of Ashura. Let's face it, brothers and sisters, the moment you start traditional commiseration, most of the youth disappear. There are a few individuals that they stay, but most of the youth leave. Shouldn't we ask why? It's not because they really have no respect for Imam Hussein. Far from it. Because they are here, they indicate they are voting by their feet that they respect Imam Hussein. They want to understand Imam Hussein. They disagree with a unique methodology that they have no comprehension. It's about time we restructure. While we keep the conservatives happy with their structure and organization, we have no objection to it. But what I'm trying to do is to ask for another step beyond the classic approach to Ashura. Keep it, add something to it that makes this unique and at the same time fruitful. Remember the 3 concentric circles? We will be able to discuss this within the youth of our community. We will be able to elaborate for those greater Muslim community that they live around us and they want to come to these centers. We focus on certain values, but particularly become critical for the community at large, that they want to find out what's going on. They desperately need. Last night I said this, our society is in chaos, the world is in chaos. Everything is falling apart. The emphasis on materialism has really created a shackle for all human beings. We really need to reorganize and focus on spirituality. But we can't do it with a methodology that worked in certain communities 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. Inshallah, I know it was a short lecture, in English lecture tonight, but tomorrow night I want to start a totally new topic, but it's going to be relevant to the conversations that I have had during the past 2 or 3 months. I hope, instead of interpreting my words in a way that I did not intend, if you did not understand it, come and ask me so I can elaborate, rather than say Sheikh said this or the other. I wish you all success, and inshallah with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, particularly I'm worried about the youth. I travel around and I see how difficult their lives are. There is an inner desire that they want to make a contribution to be there. But at the same time, they tell me repeatedly as I go around, Maulana, nobody told us. Nobody explained to us. You heard that this morning, those of you who were present, a young boy at the age of 6, 7 or 8 was critical of the linguistic gap between himself and his parents. They were unable to talk to him. The only thing that he got from his parents, this is bad, 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 bad. No, nothing. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. No, do this. It's not going to work. You may be able to force the youth up to a certain age, pull them, bring them to these masajid and tell them to sit down and don't move. Once they have tasted the degree of freedom beginning of this adolescence, if there is no conviction, they are not going to come. And that's the slippery slope beginning of the end for the community. Because we will pass very quickly. Who's going to carry them out? The fact that some of them, few of them sit over there during even my conversation, they still talk and chat. It's an indication that the whole presence in this mosque is irrelevant. I wish everyone success. And we can work, we can do it. I'm not prepared, I refuse to throw in the towel and say, well, we have passed the point of no return. No, we can do it, but we need collective mindset and working together, inshallah. Let's switch the channel.